The third week of November, the year 1813, a man fell against the gate of a farm, at the bottom of the Wenmere Downs, and the woman who found him did not scream. She had been carrying 2 pails of warm milk across the yard, when she heard the latch knock once against its post, the way it knocked when the wind took it, except there was no wind. The morning lay gray and still over the hedges, frost gone to wet on the long grass, and the gate moved again, slower this time as though something heavy leaned upon it from the lane side and could not lift itself away. Katrin set the pails down on the flat stone by the dairy door and crossed the yard without hurrying, because hurrying frightened animals and frightened men alike, and she had learned young that a steady step bought more truth than a running one. He was on his knees in the mud beyond the gate, one gloved hand fisted in the lowest rail, his head bowed so that she saw first the dark crown of his hair and the rain caught in it. A militia coat, dark and soaked through, the braid at the shoulder torn loose, his other arm pressed hard against his left side, and between his fingers, slow and unmistakable, the wet had gone from gray to a deeper color she knew the smell of, before she was near enough to see it. He lifted his face to her. Gray eyes, the color of smoke over a winter river, and a jaw set so hard against the pane that the muscles stood out along it like a cord drawn tight. He did not ask for help. That was the first thing she noticed, and she would remember it long after. A man bleeding into a stranger's mud, and his mouth made no plea. He only looked at her as though deciding whether she was worth the cost of speech. "You are bleeding," she said. "Do not pull on the gate, it will not hold you." She got the latch up, and the gate swung in, and he came forward off the rail, and would have gone face down in the yard had she not caught him under the arm and taken the whole weight of him against her shoulder. He was tall and heavier than he looked, and her knees nearly went. She had held lambs in the spring floods, and a dying ewe through a January night, and her own father across 2 years of his wasting, and she knew how to set her feet and refuse the ground. "My name does not matter," he said against her ear, the words low and level and oddly precise, an accent in them she could not place, something that rounded the vowels and made the consonants too clean. "Only that I do not stay here." "I cannot stay here. You cannot stand," she answered. "We will argue the rest indoors. Stay with me a moment, here at the gate before the house and the warmth take you on, because everything that came after turned on this single morning, on a latch that knocked when there was no wind, and on a woman who did not scream." Then she got him over the threshold of the still room, and the door shut behind them both, and the morning went on without either of them. To the village of Wendmere, Katrin Brenwick was the bee-girl, and the village said it the way one names a thing to be done with it. She was 26, and lived alone at the bottom of the downs in a low stone farmhouse her father had rented before her, with a still room off the kitchen that smelled of dried lavender and beeswax and the bitter green of crushed comfrey. Her father had been an apothecary in the town of Alden Cross, until his trade failed, and his lungs failed with it, and he had brought her out to the farm to die slowly among his herbs. And in dying, he had taught her everything he knew. She could set a bone, she could draw a fever. She knew which of the bank flowers stopped bleeding, and which only seemed to, and she kept his almanacs and his one good book of plates locked in the press by the window, because they were all she had left of the man and of the work that had been theirs together. The village did not call her an apothecary. It had a word for a woman who knew too much and asked too little, and that word was hedge witch, and they said it kindly enough at the well and unkindly enough behind their hands. She mended their children and took eggs in payment, and said nothing when they crossed to the far side of the lane on a Sunday. She had stopped minding it, or had told herself she had, which was nearly the same thing, and lasted nearly as long. Now she had a wounded man bleeding on the scrubbed deal table where she dried her herbs, and the village, and its word for her seemed very far away. She cut the coat from him with her father's shears, the good steel ones he had used for 40 years, and underneath the coat a shirt gone stiff and dark, and underneath the shirt a hurt in the meat of his left side, low below the ribs, where a ball had gone in and not come out. She had seen a musket hurt only twice, both at Aldencross. Both men who had died of the fever after, not the ball. She knew what killed in a hurt like this was not the iron but the rot. And the rot came of the dirt the ball dragged in with it, and the only mercy was to open the thing wider than it wished to be opened, and take the iron and the dirt out together while the man could still feel it. "This will be very bad," she told him. He lay gray against her pillow with his eyes half shut. "I will not lie, and say it will not. I have brandy and a leather strap and hands that do not shake. You may have all three." "How do I know your hands do not shake?" "Because I have told you they do not, and I do not waste my breath on lies." Something moved at the corner of his hard mouth. Not a smile. The memory of where a smile would go on another sort of day. "Then do it," he said. She did it. It took the better part of an hour, the strap between his teeth and her 2 fingers, and the long, thin probe her father had ground from a knitting needle, working in by feel for the cold, hard wrongness of the ball among the hot wrongness of the flesh, and the man made no sound. The strap did not stop, and his hand gripped the edge of the table until the wood groaned. And when at last the ball came free, and she dropped it, ringing into the white bowl, he turned his face to the wall and breathed like a man who has set down a weight he had carried too far. When the bleeding slowed, she cleaned the place with the brandy, and packed it with the green paste of comfrey and yarrow her father had sworn by, and she sewed the lips of it shut with a curved needle and waxed thread, small even stitches. Then she covered him and built up the fire, and sat down on the stool beside him, and only then did her own hands begin, very slightly, to shake. She picked the ball out of the bowl and turned it in the firelight. It was not a common musket ball. It was smaller, finer cast, the kind that went in a gentleman's pistol or an officer's, and there was something fused to it, a smear of cloth driven in ahead of it, dark blue wool and a thread of gold. She set it on the windowsill and did not yet know why she kept it. She kept a great many things she could not yet explain. It was a habit of her father's, inherited along with his shears. He slept through that day, and the night that followed, and the fever came up in him toward dawn as she had known it would, and she sat through it, bathing his face and his throat, and the burning skin of his chest, spooning willow bark tea between his cracked lips, and when he raved in a tongue she did not know, low and urgent, the same 3 or 4 words over and over. And once, clear as a bell in the dark room, a name, Carol Mark. She did not know it for a place. She thought it might be a person he had lost, and she filed it away with the ball and the bloodied scrap of coat, in the part of her mind that kept things. He woke on the 3rd day clear-eyed and weak as a cut flower, and watched her move about the still room a long while before he spoke. "You have not asked me anything," he said. "You were not in a state to answer. And a fever does not keep secrets. You told me more asleep than you would have woken." She set a cup of broth on the stool within his reach. "Captain, that is what the braid on your coat says, and I will call you that until you give me better. I am Katrin. This is my house. You are safe in it, which is more than I can promise you of the lane outside, because a man does not get shot with an officer's pistol and crawl across the downs unless there is someone behind him who would rather he had died of it." His gray eyes went very still. "You found the ball. I took it out of you. It is on the window. It is no soldier's ball, and the cloth in it is no soldier's coat." She held his gaze. "I do not know who you are running from. I will not ask, because you will lie, and I would rather you say nothing than start us off with a lie. You will tell me your name, though. I have had my hands inside you. I have earned a name." He looked at her for a long moment, and the firelight moved over the hard planes of his face, and at last he said, "Reynard. Reynard Daunt." And she knew, the way she knew a fever flush from a fever break, that it was not the whole of it. She let it stand. A man gave you the name he could afford, and you waited to see if he came to trust you with the rest. What she did not know, what she could not have known, kneeling there with his false name in her ears, was that the man she had stitched together on her drying table was Aurelian, hereditary prince of the small Rhenish state of Carolmar. 4 weeks fled from his own capital with his uncle's price upon his head and his uncle's men at his back across 2 countries and a sea. The truth was a great deal heavier than a saved soldier, and it was already coming up the lane toward her gate. It came in the person of Sir Adrian Warder, who rode down from the Wendmere house 4 days later on a tall grey horse with 2 men behind him, and reined in at her gate and did not dismount. And she knew him by sight as everyone in 3 parishes knew him. He was the magistrate at Alden Cross, and the leaseholder of half the down country, a man of 47, with a smooth grey face and a smooth grey manner, and he held the mortgage on her farm. Her father had borrowed against the land in his last bad year at Warder's interest, and the debt had come down to her along with the shears and the almanacs, and every quarter day she carried the payment up to the counting-house and watched a clerk enter it in a ledger and felt the rope of it draw 1 notch tighter. She was £11 behind and had been £11 behind for a year. He had never once ridden down to her gate about it. He rode down now. Miss Brenwick. He looked at her over the gate, the way a man looks at a field he means to drain. I am told a stranger came to your land, a man in a soldier's coat, hurt. Is it so? She had a basket of windfall apples on her arm, and she did not set it down. A drover slept in my barn, and went on at first light. I do not keep a register, sir. Adrian men pass. This was no drover. He let the word sit. Behind him, one of his men shifted in the saddle, and the leather creaked. There is a deserter abroad in the county, a spy more like, off a foreign ship at Lyme, carrying papers he has no business with. There is money on him from the crown and a noose at the end of him. A magistrate who took such a man would be thanked. A woman who hid him would hang beside him. He smiled, smooth and grey. I should hate to see you hang, Miss Brenwick. You are the only soul in this county who can physic a horse without killing it. I have hidden no one, she said. And the lie came out level, for she had had 2 days to make it level. Search the barn if it eases you. He did not search the barn. That was the thing she turned over afterward, lying awake. He did not search it because he did not need to, because he already knew. The man was in her house, and he wanted her to know that he knew and to be afraid. He touched his hat to her with 2 fingers and said, I will send my man down on Thursday for the £11 you owe, or for some other arrangement, should the £11 prove difficult. We are neighbors, after all. And he turned the grey horse and went back up the lane, and the threat hung in the cold air behind him long after the hoofbeats had died. She went inside. Reynard was sitting up against the wall, his face the color of tallow, and he had heard. She saw that he had heard. You should give me up, he said quietly. You heard him. There is a rope at the end of me, for you as well as for me. Put me in the lane tonight, and tell him I came back and you turned me out. He will believe it. He wishes to. And then? And then you keep your farm, and you keep your neck, and a stranger you owe nothing dies in a ditch where he should have died a week ago. She set the apples down at last. My father took in a tinker once in a bad winter with the flux on him, and 3 families on our street told him the man would carry the fever to his own door. And he kept the tinker anyway, and the tinker lived and stole my father's good cloak when he went. My father said, a man does not do a right thing for the wages of it. He does it because the alternative is to become the sort of man who would not. She looked at him. I did not take a ball out of your side to put you in a ditch on a Thursday, because a grey man on a grey horse frightened me. Drink your broth. He drank his broth. The corner of his hard mouth moved again, that ghost of a smile that had not yet learned the way back to his face, and he said low, You are a very stubborn woman, Katrin. It was the first time he had said her name. She felt it land somewhere under her ribs, in the place the ball had not been, and she turned to the fire so that he would not see her face, and she told herself it was the heat of the flames, and not anything else at all. He mended slowly through the back of November and into December, and as the side knit, the man inside it came up out of hiding by inches. He could not help her at first, and it galled him. A man, used to being served, finding himself unable to carry his own cup. She put him to shelling beans by the fire because a man who cannot stand can still use his hands, and he shelled them badly, and she did not correct him, and after a week he shelled them well. He learned the names of her hives, and which of the 2 cows kicked. And he watched her with those smoke-gray eyes as she ground and steeped and bottled her father's remedies. And once he said, "You were trained for this, properly trained. This is not a cottage woman's guesswork." And she answered without looking up that her father had been the best apothecary in Aldencross before the rich men stopped paying him. And he was quiet a while, and then he said, "The men who stop paying, they are everywhere, I find, even where you would not think to look for them." She did not understand that, yet she marked it, the way she marked everything, and went on grinding. There was a night the snow came, the first hard snow, and they sat on either side of the fire with the wind walking the eaves, and he told her a story, not his own. He was too careful for his own. He told her of a country he had visited. He said a small country in the hills beyond the Channel, where the old prince had died and left a young son, and the dead prince's brother had been made the boy's protector, and the brother had been a patient man and a clever one, and had waited until the boy was grown, then turned the council and the guard against him with gold and with lies, putting it about that the young prince was mad, a wastrel, unfit, until enough men believed it that the rest dared not say otherwise. And one night, the guard had come for the young prince in his own bedchamber, and he had gone out a window and over a wall, with a ball in his side and nothing but the coat on his back, and the name of one man in another country who might still be loyal. "And did he reach the loyal man?" Katrin asked. Reynard looked into the fire for a long while. "He does not yet know," he said. "He is still upon the road." She understood then. Not all of it. Yet enough. She understood that the name he had given her was the smallest part of the truth, large enough to have a country in it, and she understood, looking at the firelight on the hard, careful face across from her, that she had fallen, somewhere in these gray short days, into loving a man who would have to leave. She got up and saw to the fire that did not need seeing to, and said nothing, because there was nothing in her father's almanacs for this, and she had only ever known how to mend the hurts that bled. Word of him had got out, of course. In a village like Wenmere, nothing stays in one house. The shape it took was the shape such things always take, and it was Lady Mordaine Velacour who gave it words. She was the dowager of the Wenmere house, a tall, straight woman in her 60th year with a face like a closed book and diamonds at her throat at 10 in the morning. And she was Sir Adrian's friend and patroness. And when Katrin came up to the Aldencross church on the Sunday before Christmas, Lady Mordaine spoke to her in the porch, in front of half the parish. "They tell me," she said, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "that the bee-girl has taken a man into her house, a soldier, a vagabond. I do not wonder at it." A woman who has let herself fall so far below her station forgets there was ever a station to fall from. One feels it is almost a kindness that such people find each other. And she drew her skirts a careful inch aside as she passed, as though the cold of the porch might carry something from Katrin to herself. And the parish heard it, and the parish was silent, in the way a parish is silent when it agrees and is ashamed to say so. Katrin stood very straight and said nothing. She had learned long ago that an answer to a Lady Mordaine was a gift to a Lady Mordaine, and she would not give her one. The words went in regardless. They always went in. She walked home down the long white lane, with the cold working through her thin cloak, and the worn heels of her boots letting the wet up through her stockings. And she told herself it did not signify, and it signified. And she did not weep until she was past the last cottage, with no one left to see. He saw, when she came in, he was on his feet by then, moving slow and careful along the wall. And he saw her face, and did not ask, and she was grateful for that. That night, though, he sat across the fire from her and said, in his level way, "What did they call you?" In the porch I saw it on you when you came in. It does not matter. It matters to me. I find that it matters to me a great deal." He turned the shelling knife over in his hand. "Tell me the word, bee-girl," she said. "Hedge witch, a woman fallen below her station." She made herself say it lightly. "It is an old song. I know all the verses." His jaw set in the way she had learned meant something had moved in him, and would not move back. "In my country," he said slowly, "there is a word for a person who heals. It is an honored word. The man who carries it sits at the prince's own table, and is sent for in the night, and the household rises to light his way." He looked at her across the fire. "They have given you the wrong word, Catherine. Where I come from, they would have given you the other." She did not answer. There was nothing to answer. She kept that too, all the same, with the ball and the bloodied scrap of his coat, in the part of her that kept things, and it was warmer than the fire. The reckoning came on the Thursday after Christmas, and it came, as such things do, faster than she was ready for, and exactly as slow as she had feared. Sir Adrian's man came down for the £11, and she did not have it, and she had known she would not. And she gave him £8 and a string of dried herbs and a promise, and he rode back up the lane, and that should have been the end of it for the quarter. It was not. Sir Adrian was no longer interested in £11. He had ridden to Lyme and asked his questions, and come away with what he wanted, which was not money. He had a name now. He had a country. He had understood, as Catherine had understood, that the wounded man in the farmhouse below the down was worth a very great deal more than a deserter's bounty to the right buyer abroad, and he meant to take him alive, and sell him back to the uncle who wanted him dead, and grow rich on the difference. To do that cleanly, with the law on his side, and no inconvenient questions after, he needed the man to be a spy and a thief, and a witness who would swear it, and Catherine out of the way. He did it in a single afternoon, and he did it well, because he was not a careless man and never had been. He swore an information before his own bench that a foreign agent was harbored at the Brennock farm. He produced a witness, a discharged ostler named Marden from the Stormont Arms, who swore he had carried a foreign gentleman's bag, heavy with sealed papers, from a ship's boat at Lyme to the Wenbeer Road, and had been paid for it in foreign gold. And he produced the gold, 3 coins stamped with a crowned device none of the bench could read, which he said were taken from the prisoner, and which he had, in truth, had struck by a coiner in Bristol the week before. He locked the papers of the case in the iron chest at the counting-house, under his own seal, where none might examine them, and he set Marden up safe in a back room of the Stormont Arms, with silver and a guard on the door, so that none might come at him to shake his story. He left nothing to chance. He had built the cage carefully, every bar of it, and on the morning of the new year he rode down the lane with 4 men to spring it shut. She saw them come from the dairy window, dark against the snow, and she had time to do one thing, and she did it. She did not run, and she did not hide him, because there was no hiding a man in a house they meant to pull apart, board by board. She went to the press by the window, and she took out the ball, and the scrap of navy cloth with its bright gold stitching, and her father's one good book of heraldic plates, and she wrapped them in oilcloth, and she gave them to Jocelyn Fruin, the old groom who had worked the farm since before her father took it, who was forking hay in the barn, and had not yet been seen. "Take these to no one but a man you would trust with your own grave," she told him. "If a foreign soldier comes asking a real one, his own, give them only to him. Go out the low door and over the brook. Go now." Jocelyn went, and then the door came in off its hinges, and Sir Adrian stepped over it into her kitchen with the snow melting on his shoulders and a paper in his gloved hand, and he read out, in his smooth grey voice, that the woman of this house was charged with harboring an enemy of the crown, and that the said enemy was taken in the king's name. And his men laid hands on Reynard where he stood by the fire and bound his wrists, and Sir Adrian looked at Catherine over the broken door and smiled and said, "I did warn you, Miss Brenwick, that I should hate to see you hang." They took them both up to Alden Cross in a cart through the snow, and put the man in the cell beneath the magistrate's house and Catherine in the room above it, and the bolt went home, and the bell of the church across the square struck the hour into the cold. And it seemed to Catherine, sitting on the stone bench in the dark, with her hands folded in her lap, that everything her father had taught her, every herb and every stitch and every patient hour, had brought her at last only to this, a locked room, and a man she loved in chains beneath her, and a grey patient enemy who had thought of everything. She had not thought of everything. She had thought of one thing, though, and it was forking hay across a frozen brook with an oilcloth bundle under an old man's coat, and she held to that the way she had held the man at the gate, with her feet set in her refusal to give the ground. Permit me one word here, before the dark of that cell lifts, because what came next did not come by chance, and was not a rescue. She sat and waited for. It came of a thing she had done, and a thing she had known, and a worth in her that the grey man had reckoned at 11 pounds, and reckoned wrong. Reynard, in the dark beneath her, was not idle either. He had given a false name to a woman who had earned the truth, and let her be taken for his sake, and a thing had broken loose in him that had been chained longer than his wrists. He had crossed 2 countries telling himself that a prince's first duty was to survive, to spend whatever he must, men and money and other men's safety, and live and return and set right what his uncle had broken. That creed had carried him all the way to a farm at the bottom of the English Downs, and there it stopped. Up the stair was a woman who had spent herself on a stranger for no wages, but the keeping of her own soul, and he understood, sitting in the straw with the iron on him, that if he went home and ruled, and never came back for her, he would have survived as the wrong man. Jocelyn did not stop at the brook. He was old, but he had been young in a hard school, and he understood a charge laid on him. He went on through the snow to the Stormont Arms, because that was where travelers came, and a strange soldier asking strange questions would come there first, and he was right. A man had been at the Stormont Arms for 2 days, a tall, fair foreigner traveling as a wine merchant's clerk, asking, very quietly, after an English militia captain who was not one. His name was Maximilian, and he was the loyal man at the end of Reynard's road, come at last over the water and across the country, on the thin thread of a single direction, and he had nearly given up, and was settling his account to ride north on a false rumor when an old groom, in a wet coat, sat down across from him and laid an oilcloth bundle on the table and opened it. The ball, the scrap of torn navy cloth shot through with gold, and the book of plates, open to the page Catherine had marked, where among the crowned devices of the small states across the water was one, a crowned device with a running stag, that matched exactly the stamp on Sir Adrian's 3 coins, and matched exactly the device woven in gold thread into the corner of a torn coat, which a prince had been wearing when an officer's pistol fired on him in his own bedchamber, and a ball took a scrap of it into his side. Maximilian looked at the crowned device a long time. Then he looked at the old man. "Where," he said, "is my prince?" It moved fast after that, and it moved by daylight, in the open, before the whole town, which is the only way such a thing can be made to hold. Maximilian did not break into the magistrate's house in the night like a thief, because a prince, freed by stealth, is a prince still called a spy. He went instead in the cold, bright morning to the Lord Lieutenant himself, the one authority in the county above a magistrate, then at his house above Aldencross for the new year, and laid before that old soldier the ball, the wool, the plate, the coins, and his own papers under his own true seal, which named him an officer of the household of the Prince of Corelmark, a state in alliance with the crown. And the Lord Lieutenant, who had fought his own war and knew a true seal from a Bristol coiner's, sent for Sir Adrian to attend him that afternoon in the assembly room of the Stormont Arms, and to bring his prisoners and his witness and his proofs in the sight of the magistrates of 3 parishes whom he also summoned, so that whatever was done would be done in the light. So it was that on the 2nd day of the new year, the long assembly room of the Stormont Arms was full, and Catherine was brought down from her locked room, and the man she had called Reynard was brought up from his cell, with the irons still on him, and they were set side by side at the front of that crowded room before the Lord Lieutenant's table. And Lady Mordain sat in the first row in her diamonds, having come to see the low-born woman shamed, and Sir Adrian stood smooth and grey and certain, with his papers in his hand and his witness Marden at his elbow, and he did not yet know that the floor had gone out from under him. He made his case first, and he made it well. He read the information and set out the coins on the table, the crowned stag bright in the winter light from the tall windows. He called the ostler Marden, who swore again to the heavy bag and the sealed papers and the foreign gold, his story word for word as it had been in the night when Sir Adrian had paid for it. He turned to Catherine, and asked her before the room whether she denied that she had taken a foreign stranger into her house, and hidden him from a magistrate who had asked her plainly. And she said, in a clear, steady voice that carried to the back of the room, that she did not deny it, that she had taken in a hurt man and mended him and would do it again. And Lady Mordain's mouth thinned in satisfaction, and Sir Adrian smiled, because he thought he had won. Then the Lord Lieutenant said, "And the foreign gold, Sir Adrian, these coins you took them from the prisoner, from his effects?" "Yes, my lord." "Curious work." The old soldier turned a coin in his fingers. "Wah! For I had a coiner out of Bristol before me at the quarter sessions not 3 weeks past, taken for striking false guineas. And he swore, to save his neck, that he had lately struck a parcel of foreign show coin for a gentleman of this county, with a crowned stag upon it, and was paid in good English silver for the work. He set the coin down. He named no gentleman. Will you name yourself, Sir Adrian? Or shall I send for him? He is still in Bristol jail. He would know your face." And there it was. The first bar of the cage bent back, and the room stirred, and Sir Adrian's grey color did not change because he was not a careless man, but his certainty had a crack in it now, fine as a hairline in a glaze. Then Maximilian came forward, in his own coat at last, with the running stag plain upon the shoulder, and he bowed to the Lord Lieutenant, and then turned and bowed very low to the bound man in the iron. And the room caught its breath at that, a foreign officer in good cloth bowing to a chained prisoner. And he said plainly, so all could hear, that this was no spy and no deserter, but Aurelian, hereditary prince of Carolmark, driven from his own seat by his uncle's treason, hurt by his uncle's man, hunted across 2 countries to be sold back to that uncle for his death, and that Sir Adrian had known it, and had built a false charge to take him cleanly and sell him secretly. And had it not been for a woman who took a ball from his side and a scrap of his coat with it and kept them, there would have been no proof of any of it, and a prince of an allied house would have gone quietly to his murder out of an English jail. The room did not stay silent then, and in the noise of it, Sir Adrian played his last card, because a cornered man always has one, and his was the only one left to him. He said, smooth even then, that the foreigner's tale was a fine romance, but that a bound prisoner and a hired groom and a countrywoman's trinkets proved nothing, and that the witness Marden stood by his oath, an honest Englishman's oath, against the word of foreigners. And would the Lord Lieutenant truly take a cottage healer's bag of curiosities over a sworn man of the county? It was then that Catherine spoke, and she had not been bidden to, and she did it anyway. "You say the bag proves nothing," she said, and the room turned to her, the hedge witch they had all decided she was, standing very straight in her thin cloak with the worn heels of her boots, and her voice did not shake, because she had told a man once that her hands did not shake, and made it true, and she made this true now. "I am the only person living who has had this ball in her hands before today, for I cut it out of his side with my own. And I will tell you what no coiner, and no forger, and no sworn ostler could know, because only the one who drew it knows it. There is a scrap of his coat fused to the iron, dark blue wool, and a thread of gold, driven in by the shot. That gold thread is part of a device. I did not know the device. I am a countrywoman, and I do not read the arms of foreign princes. So I looked. My father kept a book of plates, and I found it there, on a page I have marked, the running stag of Carolmark, the same that is on those coins your own coiner struck, the same that is on this officer's shoulder. I did not make that thread. It was in him before any of you had heard this man's name. A wound, Sir Adrian, is the one witness that cannot be bought." She turned to the Lord Lieutenant. "Send for your surgeon. Have him look at the healing of the man's side and tell you how many weeks old that hurt is, and you will find it old enough to have been got in a far country, and not in any quarrel of this one. The flesh keeps a truer ledger than the iron chest in your counting house, and unlike that chest, it cannot be sealed against you." There was a silence in the long room after that, the held silence of a great many people understanding a thing at the same moment, and into it the Lord Lieutenant said quietly, "Bring me the surgeon." And the surgeon came and looked, and said the side was 6 weeks healed if it was a day, and could not in nature have been got at Lyme a fortnight since. And the ostler Marden, seeing the floor open, and being a small frightened man and not a brave one, broke where his betters had not, and cried out that Sir Adrian had paid him, had given him the words, had set him up safe in the back room with silver and a guard, and that he had never carried any bag from any boat in his life. And the last bar of the cage went back, and it was empty, and had never held the prince at all. It had held the man who built it. They did not destroy Sir Adrian Warder in that room. There was no cruelty in it, only a public correction. The Lord Lieutenant ordered him held to answer for the false coin and the false oath, and the false charge. His magistracy was struck from him before the parishes there assembled, and the men who had ridden at his back fell away from him as such men do. And Lady Mordaine Velacourt, who had come in her diamonds to see a country nobody shamed, sat very still in the first row, and watched her friend taken out under guard, and understood slowly in front of everyone that she had spent her contempt on the wrong woman, and her friendship on the wrong man, and that there was no graceful way left to her to leave the room. She did not speak again that day. She rose when it was over, and she paused before Catherine on her way to the door, and the whole room watched to see what a great lady does at such a pass. What she did was incline her head, only that. A small stiff bow of the head, the kind a proud woman gives when she has been shown to be wrong and is too old to pretend she has not. It was not an apology. It was a correction given in public, and from Lady Mordaine it was a very great deal. Then the iron was struck from the prince's wrists, and the room waited, because there is a moment after every reckoning when the arena wants its declaration, and they did not know yet what his would be. He did not give them a speech. He had learned, somewhere in a still room at the bottom of the downs, the worth of saying little and meaning all of it. He crossed the open floor of the assembly room slowly, for his side was not yet whole, and he stopped before Catherine, and in the held silence of that crowded place, he took her work-roughened hand in both of his. And he said so that every soul in 3 parishes heard it. "This is the woman I mean to marry." 7 words. A name claimed in the same room where a great lady had named her bee-girl an hour before. He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. He said it the way she had taught him a true thing is said, level and plain and final. And he raised her hand and bowed over it as a man bows over the hand of a princess there in front of the Lord Lieutenant and Lady Mordaine and her diamonds and the whole town of Alden Cross and Catherine Brenwick, who had been called fallen below her station in the church porch on the Sunday before Christmas, stood in the winter light from the tall windows, with a prince bowed over her hand and learned what it was to be given, at last, in front of everyone, the other word. She married him in the spring, though not at once, and not in the way the village expected, which had been to lose her to a foreign court the moment the snow broke. He would not have it so. He sent Maximilian home across the water with letters, and he stayed, mending fully now, and he learned the rest of the farm while his cause was argued in councils he could not reach with his own voice. Word came in March that his uncle's faction had fractured of its own weight, the guardsman who had turned against a wounded boy, turning again now that the boy was a wronged prince with an allied crown behind him, and that the seat of Carelmark waited for him to take it back. And he asked Catherine, by the fire where she had once put him to shelling beans, whether she could bear to be a princess of a small far country in the hills across the water, and she said she did not know the first thing about being a princess, and he said that was very well, for he had not made much of being a prince. And they would learn the unfamiliar work together, as she had taught him to bank a fire. Badly at first, and then, well. They were married in the little church at Wenmere in May, in the porch where Lady Mordain had drawn her skirts aside, and Lady Mordain came, in grey now and not diamonds, and sat at the back, and that was its own small kind of grace. Jocelyn Fruin gave the bride away, because there was no one with a better right, having carried her worth across a frozen brook when it might have cost him his neck. And the bees, woken early by a warm spring, hummed in the churchyard limes through the whole of it. She did not give up the still room. That was the thing the village told longest afterward, the thing they could least make sense of, and came in the end to be proudest of. A princess of a foreign house, and she kept her father's shears and his almanacs and his curved needle, and she physicked the children of 3 parishes still. Only now they came to the front door and not the back, and the word hedge-witch died quietly out of the language of Wenmere. She took the trade abroad with her in the end, and they say there is a still room now in a small palace in the hills of Corelmark that smells of beeswax and bitter green, and that the household rises to light her way when she is sent for in the night, and that she is given there without thinking the honoured word her own country never found for her. On the window-sill of that still room, where another woman might have kept a jewel, there sits a small misshapen ball of iron, and fused to it a scrap of dark blue wool with a single thread of gold. The crowned stag of the house she married into worked into the corner of it. She kept it without yet knowing why. On the grey November morning, a man fell against her gate, and did not ask for help. She knows why now. She turns it sometimes in the firelight, the iron she drew from the side of a stranger she was not afraid of. And she sets it back on the sill and goes to her work, and the bees go on in the limes outside, and the latch on the still room door knocks once against its post when the wind takes it, and she no longer waits for the wind to be still. Should the woman of the still room have stayed with you, linger a moment after the fire burns down, and name the moment you will carry from her. It was no small thing to sit with her through so long a winter, and I am glad of the company. Now the spring has come and the bees are awake in the limes,